Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Gen Z iOS Code. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about model VV model and why I personally think it's not enough, at least in most cases, right? So everyone says they're using model VV model, but I see that a lot of people are not using it well. So let's break it down a little bit, right? So model VV model, what does that mean? Basically, we have a model, we have a view, and we have a view model, right? For anything that we want to do in our app. So when I say model VB model is not enough, it's usually because we need some sort of service or store layer, right? So we cannot just leave it at model VB model, at least on what most people think, right? So especially beginners or mid-levels, right? When we're building an app, you have something called model, which is basically the domain of our app, right? So you have, let's say we have a to-do list, you will have a struct like these, right? To do. And then maybe it has an ID, a name, a description, and then you have more things, right? You have a list. You have all those things are basically the data models, right? So that's what they put in their model. The model is basically all the data models that we have in the app. And then for anything else, right? They'll have like, a lot of apps have just a view and a view model, right? So you have a view in which you show basically you have all the components that are shown in the screen, and then you have a view model that has all the logic, right? So let's say we're just doing the login screen, right? So a typical view will just have like, the text fields, and then, the login button, the sign up, all of that. And then the view model will have basically all the logic, right? Let's say we're using Firebase as a backend. Well, the view model will also have that, right? So, you tap on the button, the login button, the view reaches to the view model, and then the view model will reach out to Firebase to make that call. Well, let me tell you, that's not good. That's usually not good unless you're doing a very, very small app, right? But when you make it like very scalable, when you scale your app, that's not going to be a good practice. That's not going to be really good. It's not very scalable. So why? Why I'm saying this? Because let's say this view and view model are the authentication view and authentication view model, right? Well, let's say now we want to have, let's say we have, let me just create another one of these. Now, let's say we have a to-do view, right? A to-do view and a to-do view model, right? Let's just put it like these. So now let's just say to-dos, and here to-dos. And let's just say here, we're going to have a view where we show all the to-dos, right? Just a list of to-dos. And then here we have the view model. So now let's say from this view model, you need to have access to the authenticator user. There's some information, right? To see if it's authenticator or not, or maybe some information about the user. What do? If this is, let's say, the login view model and the login view and login view model. Well, that, the Firebase logic, you have it in this view model. So you either repeat it here, right? In the to-dos view model, or you can import this view model into the to-dos view model. But we don't want to import a login view model, right? Into the to-dos view model. Because yeah, we definitely don't want to do that. We want to decouple things, right? So we don't want to like, the view model should only be presentation logic, right? So here comes my understanding of things, right? And what I'm trying to tell you. So you should have a very simple view that only shows presentation, right? It's only presentation. It's only components that we're showing in the UI, nothing else, right? Nothing else. So you have purely the text field, you have purely the buttons, the images, and the things you're showing on the screen. You don't have a sorting logic in there. You don't have, any sort of logic. You wouldn't have it in the view, right? So then we come across the view model, right? So the view model shouldn't be massive, right? The view model should not be a very massive view model with, let's say, for example, like logic to log into Firebase. No, it should not have that, right? The view model should only be presentation logic. So what do I mean by that? Any logic that's strictly related to presenting something in the screen, right? So basically you have a text field, well, you'll have the thing, you'll have the binding variable, the state variable, you'll have it in the view model, right? So things like that. Maybe you're doing a sorting, maybe you're doing something else, or anything related to presentation logic, you'll have it in the view model. Basically, what are we showing in the view and how we're showing it, right? That's the view model. And then, all right, so then let me actually draw an arrow right here. So we're going to go from view to view model. So whenever we need some presentation logic, we'll go to the view model, right? So now the view model, let's say you tap on a button to log in, right? Now that goes into the view model, and now the view model has a login function, right? So now, how's the view model? So how can the view model react to that, right? If we're not going to have any Firebase inside of it. Well, the view model could just have a function that, let's say, checks if you're allowed to log in or not. Let's say your email is right. So all those things are like basically a validation. So you can have all of that in the view model because that's presentation logic. And then you'll have a call to something else to actually log in into Firebase. So the view model technically doesn't even need to know about Firebase. So we're going to have something. This is what I usually call, and let me copy these. This is what I usually call a store, right? So we're going to have this separate layer called store. And let me actually put an arrow to it. So in the store, we're going to have the function, the actual function to log in, the one that's going to go to Firebase, right? To actually log in and come back with the token, right? With an authentication token, and it's actually going to get us logged in. So the view model, the only thing it's going to know is that there's a store that has a function to log in, the actual logic to do that. So the view model is going to do all the presentation logic. And at the end of that, when it's time to log in, it's just going to reach out to the store and it's going to offload of that authentication logic to the store. And the same thing if we have something else, right? Like let's say we have a user, we have some user in our app, and then we also have some service to get the user from our database. So maybe, this will be, let's just say, authentication store, just for the sake of the example. Let's just say auth, not these, let's just say auth view, and then auth view model, just see for the sake of the example, right? So all right, so we have the authentication view model, and authentication store. So let's say we have a user, but the authentication is a service from Firebase, let's say. So we might have, let's say, a user store. Why we might have a user store? Well, the user, a lot of that is stored in a database, right? In case of Firebase would be, let's say, Firebase Firestore. So yeah, we have that in it's a separate service, right? It's a separate service where we fetch and we do stuff for the user. So that will be in a separate store, right? And then this view model can also access to this store, right? For anything that the view model needs to do about like authenticating, it reaches out to the authentication store and then it can do that. And for anything, let's say we need the user, or we need to save, let's say, first name and last name to the user database. Now we're going to reach out to the user store, and the user store is a decoupled piece of, class. And then the user store is going to be in charge of anything that has to do with dealing with the user data, right? With, going to the Firestore, saving information, retrieving information, and same thing for authentication store. And now you can see how like everything like comes together, because now let's say we're using the to-dos view that goes to the view model for presentation logic, and let's say here we need access to the user, because let's say we need some information to the user. Well, from the to-dos view model, we don't need to reuse this view model that's only for presentation logic for authentication view, right? We don't need to do that. We can just go ahead and just go to the user store. We can just use the user store, and then we can do that. And then the same thing, right? The same thing we can do with, let me put it like that. And the same thing we can do with the authentication store. Let's say we need to do something. Let's say we need to check, or we're doing a logout. Let's say we have a logout button right here, or in a settings, doesn't matter. And you need stuff from authentication. Well, you can just, have the authentication store do that, right? The view model doesn't need to do that. Now, I think this solves the problem. So it's model view model, and then we're adding another layer that I call store, but you can call it whatever you want. You can call it manager, you can call it service, right? In my personal opinion, or actually my preference, I usually call this store. But there's two ways you can solve this, right? So this is one way of doing it, right? This will get you very scalable. But there's actually another way, right? You could have multiple things, right? So let's just say you have let's just say you have some sort of service, right? So let's say this to-dos view model. Let's just create right here another store. let's just say we're gonna call this to-dos a store, and this to-do store is going to be in charge of actually getting is to-do store is going to be in charge of actually, yeah, of getting all the to-dos, right? So anything that has to do with the to-dos, maybe a publisher to the to-dos, maybe we're getting all of them, we're creating a to-do list, we're creating, so all of that will get done in the to-do store. So all that logic will get encapsulated into this to-do store. But the good thing about all of these is like the view model doesn't know where the to-do store is going to go. Right? To-do store, the only thing the view model knows is, hey, I need the to-dos, right? I reach out to the store and the store gives me the to-dos. That's it, right? The view model, that's the good thing. The view model doesn't know about anything else, right? All right, so let's say we're in the to-do store now. Now, the to-do store, you can put Firebase code inside the to-do store, right? And that's like considering, let's say it's a small app. We know 100% we're only using Firebase. Then yeah, you can add, the Firebase logic inside the store like that. If not, right, if you want to be even more scalable, what you would do is that you will create a service and you will create to-dos, maybe Firebase service, right? You will create a service like this. And now the store, a to-do store, will go to the to-dos Firebase service to get those to-dos. So then why you would do that, you would think, right? Now there's another layer, right? There's a store and there's a service layer. Well, I think about the store as a little bit more centralized, centralized class and centralized thing that we can have all sort of logic in there. Even though like it's very specific, you see this one's only the to-dos, and then we have one for the authentication and one for the user. But why do we need to do a to-dos Firebase service, right? Well, let's say we have, let's say we're dealing with cache data too, right? Because let's say you have a to-dos app, but maybe you're outside, you're maybe in the iPad, or maybe you don't have service right now. So you open up the app and you don't have internet, right? So if you don't have internet, it cannot go fetch the to-dos. But let's say you have cache data. Let's say like your Notes app, right? And say you open up the app, and if you realize there's no internet, then instead of going to Firebase, because you can't, you get them from the cache, right? You get them from the device, from the ones that were saved last time. Well, in order to do that, let's just say we have a service, right? Thing right here. And let's just say we have to-dos repo, right? And now let me explain this in a second. So now let's say the to-do store can actually have, and I'll make it a little bit more complicated now, but it's actually not that complicated, but just for you to see what's the value of these. Let's say we have a network. Oh, I did something there. Let's see. All right, so let me duplicate this. And let's say we have a network service, right? There we go. This could be either service, either store, depending on what you're doing, right? So the to-do store can actually, the first thing the to-do store can do is reach out to this network service, right? And check if there's Ethernet, right? So if there's Ethernet, right, it'll, this will come back saying, yes, there's Ethernet. Then the to-do store will reach out to to-dos Firebase service, right? It'll do that. It'll reach out to those to-dos Firebase service. And it'll get them from there. Then this to-do store will get all the to-dos, will pass it into the to-dos view model, and then I'll pass it into the view. All right, so we're clear on that. But let's say the to-do store, goes to the network service, and the network service says, no, there's not connection. There's not current connection. Well, now the to-do store, instead of fetching the to-dos from the to-dos Firebase service, it'll go the other way, right? It'll go to the to-dos repo, which is basically the to-dos that are saved in our device locally, right? As cache. So then, why is this important? Of course, imagine having all that logic inside the store. No, so the store, imagine, and in even more like chaotic, right? Having all that logic in the view model. Imagine the view model for a second. Having network service, stuff in there, and then it'll check and then it'll go here or there. And then if we swap out services, it's going to be all a mess. So in this case, now you can see how the architecture is like pretty clean. You have the view, which only knows about components that are shown in the view. You have to-dos view model, which, handles anything that has to do with presentation logic. Then the view model will reach out to the store without knowing where the store is going to get the to-dos. It doesn't know anything about that. It only knows that, hey, I have a store for these. This will give me what I want, right? Now the store is the one in charge. Now the store doesn't have the to-dos Firebase service embedded, right? It doesn't have that. A to-do store is the one like delegating, right? It's the one saying, hey, it's the one talking with all the services to know what to do. So it's going to talk to the network service, and depending on that, it's going to go either to the to-dos Firebase to the to-dos repo, right? And then the beauty of these is like tomorrow, let's say you're not using Firebase service, the view model doesn't even know, doesn't even notice, right? Let's say you're not using this anymore. Now you have, instead of Firebase, now you're using another service completely. Then you don't have to edit the view model. You don't have to edit the store, not even the store, the to-dos repo, the network service. Only thing you do is you replace this Firebase service with another service. And that's it. And the same thing if you want to add another one, right? It's the same thing. It's like very little change, and you're less, you're less likely to break things that already exist, right? And everything is a lot more scalable. So now the same thing with authentication, right? From here, you can access authentication store, the user store, to-do store, and the same thing. So stores are very reusable, and services as well. So to put it into perspective, so say you want to do, you have your views in your view models. So anything that you have in your app that you can think about, this piece of, code, I'm trying to do this functionality, try to think, where does it fall off, right? So I'm trying to add a to-do, right? I'm trying to delete a to-do. I'm trying to edit a to-do. So all those things, try to think, hey, can I make all of that a separate service, right? It seems like I'm doing related tasks for you, right? So that's what you need to do. Anything that you can decouple and get out of the view model, you have to do that. Put it in a separate service, put it in a separate store, and then use it independently. Something that you can completely take out and use it in a different project, right? So let's use Firebase service. You could technically, if you do it well, you can take it completely out, give it to a friend or give it to someone else that's doing a to-do list app. And then that friend's to-do list app will work with that because you made it really independent. And that's really, really awesome. This is really, really awesome for testing as well. Because you can test, now you can test your view models very easily, even your views, right? But the store, all the logic, especially the logic, like anything you have in the store, you can test really easily because let's say a user store is only user. So we're not mixing up user, auth, to-dos, only user. Auth store is only authentication store logic. To-do store is only that logic. And then everything when, the more decouple you have things, the better it is for testing. So that's really important to know. So actually, before we go, let me actually show you something here. So I do have this app called All Done, right? Where I did some of it. So everything I do here is following these principles. So we have an authentication view. We have an auth view. So here we use Firebase as well. So in this case, you see the view is like very, very simple. Basically only has like components, right? Basically only showing like all the components we can have here. And then the view model, again, like you see, everything is like extremely like simple. It's not a massive view model. And then we don't have like the Firebase logic inside of here, right? So you can see that how we injected the stores. We're using dependency injection, which is another topic of discussion. That's very important. So we're using this, authentication store. We have a user store and we have a to-do store, right? So whenever we want to log in, right? Let's say right here, we want to sign in. Yeah, we do a validation logic. We make an alert, right? If the user cannot sign in, is not able to sign in. And in order to sign in, we're just reaching out to the store. We're saying, yeah, authentication, I need to sign in. authentication store that signing, I passing in the email and the password, and that's it. And the same thing for the other ones. Let's say we're signing up, right? To sign up, I need to do the same thing, reach out to the store and sign up. But then we need to create, let's say, a user profile. And then, for creating the user profile, of course, we need to check for the authenticated user. And then we go ahead and use the user store. So user store, create new user. And then we pass in all the information, extra information like first name, last name, email. They created things like that. And then we have the authentication store, which again, since I'm using dependency injection, I do have protocols and things. So I can explain that in a separate video. But basically, you see what we do here is all strictly related to authentication. We have authentication store. This one's tied to Firebase, and everything we do in here is basically, this is a whole piece of code that we can reuse on like any app, that all it does is basically communicates with Firebase and does authentication services, right? So let me show you. So if you want the full code for that, I have several apps like Income Ultra. All Done is the one I was showing, right? The one for the to-do list. It looks like these. I have a tic-tac-toe app, and I have an Income Ultra app, and some more. So the source codes, I'm gonna leave them in the description in case you want to get them, right? For all these apps they all follow what I'm talking about and all these principles: dependency injection, model, ViewModel, advanced, and all of that. And I do have completely full courses in which I show how to make these apps. I'm also going to leave them in the description in case you want to look at them and follow the courses. And in there, I actually go over the whole system design, go over every single piece of code, and basically, all the stores, all the functionality, how I divide the code and all of that. So if you want to look at that, check the description down below, and then you can go ahead and check that out. Right. So now let's go back here, and now you can kind of see why I think just model, ViewModel, is just not enough, right? I think for a very simple app, it works. But when you're actually doing a production app, an app that can scale, when you're doing, let's say, an interview, you need to mention this. So this whole interaction is actually very, very good. And as you explain this, let's say you're doing a system design interview, this is very, very good, right? That you have your app into like different components, and whatever piece of logic that you're going to have, you have it completely decoupled, completely separate. You explain why, and now you're able to know why we should do these things and why we should just not have a ViewModel as 500 lines of code with like a bunch of logic that, it can be safely decoupled and the app can be more testable too in general, right? So I really hope you got a lot out of this video. I actually enjoy doing these a lot. As I see like more people and more apps, and then the common mistakes that usually, especially beginners, developers do. So I should leave a like and subscribe if you want more content like these, and I'll see you in the next one.